Welcome to this week's Workers' World Labour Show. I'm your host, Helga Jansen-Daubia. Joining us later here will be Michaela Miller for this week's Labour News. Over many years, this show has focused on the crisis at Eskom and its impact on working people. The state-owned electricity generating entity has ensured power outages or load shedding, impacting on the economy and our daily lives, steeping increases in the price of electricity and threats to Eskom workers' job security. In today's show, we focus on the latest developments in the context of the government's new dawn and implications for Eskom workers and working class communities in general. But before we get into the discussion, let's take a look at an insert produced by the Workers' World Media Productions editorial team.
How has the Eskom crisis affected you as a Cape Town resident?
So very badly. The load shedding is a disaster. It's ridiculous, exorbitant at the moment.
Into yombane iyani affecta kakubi wena bhuti wami ngoba pha endlini nabantwana abancinci abafunda izolo umbane wahamba izolo abantwana incwadi zawo akazange uzifune nxa kumnyama.
Eskom was started or put together to generate power for the mining sector in South Africa. And at that moment in time, the mining sector was either owned by big business and the state itself. So it made sense for a power utility to exist to get energy to the mines. So funny enough, Kimberley was the first city in the world to get electricity before London. Only later on did it end up focusing on actually generating electricity for the masses.
The tariffs are hiking. You know, as a working class, it's paining for me to have to spend something like 2,000 rand a month only on electricity. You know, when I buy 200 rand worth of electricity, it only gives me 72 kilowatts, which only lasts me for 4 days. And if you can times that for the whole month, that is almost half of my salary. And that really I cannot afford to lose that much.
So like everybody else, it's affected me financially. It used to be that I could pay 500 rand for electricity for the month, and now it doesn't even last me half the month, especially during winter. It's also incredibly inconvenient with the load shedding. It's bad for productivity, it's bad for my work. But what I'm most concerned about in terms of Eskom and the crisis of leadership in Eskom and the crisis that Eskom has led the whole country into is the issue of climate change.
So one of the biggest challenges is reconciling how it can be corporatized, but also giving resources to the masses. And that snowballed to the issues that we're facing today. One of the biggest other challenges I'd say actually is the idea of thinking that we can build power stations without actually maintaining them, which led to, one would say, the 2007/2008 load shedding that began. You find some documents and some sort of literature that says that the Mbeki government at the time were warned a couple of years beforehand that the power stations needed to be maintained. And one can sort of gleefully think of what Mbeki would have said, which was, the market will take care of the power stations. And the market did, and that's why we still have load shedding.
We've got this cut-offs that Eskom, if he comes into your house and cut your electricity, he might say you're owing. And then because you're owing, they'll come and cut your electricity.
Whenever there's a load shedding, 1 or 2 appliances are going to be destroyed or are going to be damaged. And then now that expense is left with the consumer to fix.
We found 5 key Eskom problems. The first one being the cost of primary energy. The second one being the cost of servicing the plus 400 billion debt that Eskom has. The third one is the failure of Eskom to collect revenue. You know that Eskom is owned a lot of money by municipalities. I think now it's at 36 billion. And then the fourth one is the cost of servicing the power purchase agreements, the PPAs. The contract that is signed between Eskom government and the independent power producers. the IPPs. And the last one, there's a drop in sales. And when the sales drops, they affect almost everything because drops in sales will affect your revenue.
So instead of a government to save Eskom, the government must save the poor people. The solar panel it's the best. Clean energy, it's the best.
Our president keeps on chopping and changing who's going to be either the group CEO or the CEO itself of Eskom. But what we're seeing with what Minister Pavin Gordon put on the table in relation to the roadmap in terms of restructuring Eskom is that all they're wanting to do right now, the government, is to make sure that they create the conditions for a seamless move to unbundling Eskom. And they're doing that under the guise of we need to transform because we need to deal with the climate crisis. So that's in essence what's taking place.
So the bottom line is that unbundling doesn't resolve Eskom's biggest problems. In fact, it's going to add to its cost burdens because you're now going to have 3 administrations to run these three unbundled Escoms. All those 3 entities will require an executive management. You're actually going to bloat the wage bill.
And this is, I would say, the most urgent intervention we need to start thinking about. And in the common concept which everyone is talking about, we call it the just transition. Now, the just transition basically speaks to how we move away from one system into another. And in this case, we'll be talking about how we phase out coal to move to alternative or renewable energy of electricity generation.
Welcome back. Michaela Miller standing by with this week's Labour News highlights. Over to you, Michaela.
Thank you, Helga. In this week's highlights, starting off with good news, NEHAWU has held a successful 12th National Congress. In Worcester, the St. Vincent's Hospital nurses strike hit a record of 8 months. Jordan dissolves Teachers Union and jails its board members. And the ITUC and Global Union Federations condemned the designation by Israel of 6 Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist organizations. All this and more later in the full bulletin. The topic of discussion for this week is the Eskom crisis and its impact on the working class. Helga, over to you.
Thanks, Michaela. Let's get right into it. And joining us via Zoom, we're joined by Sandra van Niekerk, Project Coordinator for Public Service International. Welcome, Sandra. And just to unmute yourself, great to have you with us. Certainly no stranger to the Workers' World Labour Show.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
We're also joined by Pakamile Shlaubi Majolo, National Spokesperson for the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. Welcome, Pakamile, and thanks also for your patience.
Thank you for having me on the show, and good evening to all the other guests on the show.
And finally, Kangela Beloy, National Energy Coordinator of Eskom from the National Union of Mine Workers. Welcome to you, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much to you and your viewers.
Great. We're going to get into the discussion. Sandra, we're going to start with you, and we're hoping that you can give us a sense. The Eskom crisis, of course, 13 years in the making, because I very clearly remember the very first time I got stuck in the lift because of load shedding at the city of Cape Town. But the Eskom crisis has many tentacles in the last 13 years. Can you give us, Sandra, some kind of indication of what the most crucial tentacles of the Eskom crisis is for us now at this stage?
In fact, the crisis actually started long before 13 years ago, and I think we can see the origins of the crisis in the 1980s, when neoliberalism was the dominant kind of paradigm happening worldwide. And the government, the apartheid government at the time, started looking towards the privatization of state-owned entities as part of kind of, the global neoliberal paradigm. That continued even when the ANC came into power in 1994. So we've seen the kind of commercialization and the corporatization of Eskom start from that time. And it's because of that commercialization and corporatization of Eskom that I think we're sitting with the problem that we're sitting with now. So obviously it's gone up and down, and there have been particular issues at particular times. But a lot of the problem that we're sitting with now comes from a decision that the government took in the 2000s to privatize Eskom. They wanted to privatize Eskom. So they stopped looking to invest in new generation capacity, in maintenance, very importantly, because the idea was that the private sector would step in and do that. Then, partly because of the union opposition to privatization, privatization as such never went ahead, but we're sitting with that problem of the state not having sufficiently invested in generation and maintenance. And I think that for me is a lot of the core reasons for the problem that we sit in now. And I think it must be located. I mean, I don't think we're only sitting with Eskom as a problem in South Africa. We're sitting with a kind of a structural problem caused by the implementation of neoliberal policies. And, I can expand on that more, but I think the kind of financing issues, it all links back to the kind of, and the level of energy poverty we've got in the country, issues of disconnections, etc., all link back to the overall neoliberal paradigm which the government is implementing.
Thank you for that, Sandra. I'd like to bring in Kangela Beloy from NUM. Kangela, you are at the coalface of Eskom as the National Energy Coordinator for NUM. Would you say that, and give us some insight, being at the coalface with the framing that Sandra provides, that this is the dregs, the result of the early 1990s when the ruling party as new government made some crucial neoliberal decisions that workers are now paying the price for?
Yeah, thank you very much. Sandra is correct. This problem of Eskom started long time ago. I will remember when President Thabo introduced the Kia policy around 1996. And that decision was taken to take away the mandate to construct new built power stations from Eskom, and hoping that private sector will take over the construction of new power stations. But by then, the price of electricity was too low that it was not attractive for capital to actually join in and assist in building power stations. That's why we started Eskom actually as a company. By then, it had good leaders. Those good leaders wrote a letter to government to say that in early 2007, we will start having blackouts if we don't build new power stations. And then, by then, it was too late, but the government was still hoping that private sector is going to invest in building new power stations. But that did not happen, And in 2007, as we all know, we started to have rolling blackouts. Until now, we still have those rolling blackouts. You see, the issue of neoliberalism in South Africa is becoming a very big problem. Now, there is this issue of just transition. As the NM, we do support the issue of green energy. However, we are seeing what we characterize as a green capitalism, and green colonization, whereby money is brought into the country, and then we are requested to move away from all forms of energy and then only concentrate on green energy. And you see, the good examples are there, like Germany, that Germany today is suffering from the wrong decisions that were taken to move straight from other forms of energy to green energy.
Kangela, allow me to bring Pakamile in here, and I do want to come back to the points that you raise, and there's a heads up for Sandra as well. But we're going to talk about green capitalism and the notion of renewable energy being, the panacea to the rolling blackouts that we've got. Pakamila, I'd like to bring you in here. In relation to rolling blackouts and poor coal supply, without being too conspiratorial, let us just focus on the workers who are working at Eskom and workers who have come out in the media in the last days to actually report being at home because coal supplies are not reaching where it's supposed to be reaching for them to work. Which means that if we are to take what the workers are saying as very serious, there does seem to be a disconnect between the requirements that the state is supposed to provide to the country and economy and the risk that it clearly has to workers' jobs.
Good evening, and again, I just want to acknowledge your guests this evening. I think the issues around Eskom, and for us, really, we feel that workers have been used as a scapegoat up for structural failures, which as actually being at the core of why we are where we are today. Eskom.
We're going to go to a break while we manage with our gremlins in our connectivity issues. Pakamile, I'm going to ask you just to pause while we go to a break. To you at home, don't go away. And when we do come back, we would have sorted out our connection issues. Thank you. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, we're talking the Eskom crisis. Pakamile, before the break, and we had a few technical glitches, and we're glad that you're back with us. You spoke about that workers are being used as scapegoats for the current Eskom crisis. Continue.
Yes, indeed. I was just simply trying to illustrate the fact that Eskom's problems now, we should have predicted, given the fact that government took a very conscious decision in around 2008 to stop investing in infrastructure, to stop investing in the state of Eskom and investing in its infrastructure. So, and there were early signs already, as correctly outlined by my colleagues Sandra van Niekerk and Kangela Baloyi. If you recall, former Minister Malusi Gigaba, who was a minister at that time, also confirmed that a decision was taken to stop investing in improving Eskom and improving its infrastructure. So we should not be surprised now when we are experiencing breakdowns, when we're experiencing consistent load shedding. And as unions, we have seen, particularly under Andre de Ruyter, he's very quick to blame workers for when there are failures with the system. I think people must remember that this is a man who came into the job, a month into the job, he was telling media that he would end load shedding within 18 months. So he needs to explain to us what was it at that time in January 2020 that informed him that he could end load shedding within 18 months, that now he's now telling us it will take 5 years, the horse is dead, it cannot be resuscitated, there are no solutions. Exactly. At the end of the day, we have not seen any responsibility being taken at the highest levels for the state of Eskom. We have seen a lot of scapegoating in the media, whether it was during the wage talks, where the false allegation was made that workers' salaries were a burden to Eskom, when in fact it's an objective fact that Eskom's cost drivers even now are the cost of primary energy in the form of the cost of coal, which has increased year on year since 2007 without intervention, plus a very expensive renewable energy independent power producer project, plus the money they're spending on diesel to keep the lights on. All of those things are the things that are adding to Eskom's cost burden. But what you read in the media, and even now with load shedding, every time it's workers who are the problem.
Pakamila, let me bring Sandra in here. Sandra, so in the last while of our segment that we've been discussing, we've seen in the 70s, in the 80s, and even 90s, there was a move to privatize. We know that the trade union movement were in high opposition to this, which meant that the state, the ruling party, could not continue with privatization. Kanyile and Pakamile and yourself both speak about 2007, the warning signs came. But there was a systematic stoppage of investment. And so would you say, without being too conspiratorial, that even though the state did not get its way to privatize, it is doing everything in its power to create the correct conditions, including the fact, as Pakamile says, scapegoating workers, including the fact that there's once again the proposed restructuring of Eskom into 3 entities. Is this a correct assessment of the last, and let's say 30 years?
Yeah, I think it's definitely true, and I think, you know, if you look at what the current CEO is doing, it's almost as though he's being more efficient at implementing neoliberal policies. So, I mean, I think the number of kind of disconnections has increased. So it's not just load shedding that is a problem. It's also that people are being disconnected because of not paying, but people cannot pay because of the extreme levels of poverty and inequality in the country. So it's about Eskom kind of taking to heart and implementing the kind of neoliberal policies of full cost recovery. So however much it costs you to generate your electricity, you pass that on to consumers. If you don't pay, you just get disconnected. So it's a lack of, you know, I think it's a lack of recognition of energy as a public good, of electricity as a public good, that people have a right to, that it's a human right to have electricity. And I think, yeah, so I think it's definitely, and I think what they, you know, this kind of pushing unbundling as part of the solution, and saying, but unbundling is not privatization. We know that it does in most cases lead to privatization, and it is very much about the marketization, bringing the market into electricity instead of emphasizing it as a public good that needs a public ethos and that needs a publicly driven plan to ensure that it's accessible to all.
Thanks, Kanyile. Let's talk about something that you raised earlier. Because clearly, as the way Sandra frames it, there are moves afoot by the current CEO to actually to steamroll ahead with this privatization of fossil energy. But you spoke about a just transition to renewable energies, but you're also cautioning against green capitalism. And we see that COP26, of course, is giving a lot of opportunity to the green capitalists. Just give our viewers a sense of what it is that you mean and what dangers this green capitalism may hold for workers.
You see, when we talk about green capitalism, it stems from where Kosato characterized the situation of just energy or just transition as a socially responsibility of all countries, where they said we need a fair global deal. You know, because you see, historically, developed countries developed themselves using fossil fuels. You know, and in that process, they were producing greenhouse gases that actually are responsible for the damage that we are suffering today of the ozone layer. You see, and now the developing countries are starting to develop themselves using the same fossil fuel. The developed countries want to prevent us from developing ourselves. So when we talk about a fair global deal, we are saying, let's look at the countries, and those rich countries must be more responsible in saving the planet, in reducing more of the emissions. than us. You know, in reality, South Africa.
Let me ask you just to press pause and let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here. This is exactly the position that the Minister of Minerals and Energies in his statement came out this week. That the burden of transitioning becomes the developing world, Africa, as if we are to blame for the environmental conditions, and yet it is industrialized countries that are the first sinners, you know, green sinners. So this is really interesting because this is the position that the minister also had, speaking of a different hymn sheet to the president.
Yeah, no, we saw that there is a different approach when it comes to this issue between the president and the minister. You see, but the minister is correct. You know, the reality is South Africa contribute only 1%, actually less than 1% of the emissions. You see, although now they're coming with the issue of per capita, South Africa is higher, is one of the highest countries. But when you talk about the per capita, it's when you divide the total emissions by the number of people. South Africa, you can't compare South Africa's population with countries like China, USA, and other, because those countries have got a lot of people. So even if they emit a lot, when they divide with the number of people, the number becomes lower because you see the denominator is bigger. So our denominator is smaller. So you will find that we
Once again, we seem to have a gremlin in our system. We'll get Mr. Beloy back. We'll be back after this. Don't go away to you at home. We'll continue our conversation about the crisis in Eskom.
A very warm welcome back to Workers World Labour News. We hope you're well and keeping safe. Thanks for joining us. The National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union recently held its 12th National Congress in Boksburg under the theme Strengthen Workplace Organisation to defend collective bargaining, deepen class consciousness and advance internationalism. Over 594 delegates representing 279,465 members attended the 12th National Congress. In response to the government's wage freeze in the public sector, the NAYAO Congress viewed it as a total disrespect of the collective bargaining process and workers. The Congress sent out a clear message to the government that they remain resolute in the rejection of the petty salary increase to reduce the rate of exploitation and improve the conditions of service for their members and public service workers in general. In Worcester, the St. Vincent Hospital nurses' strike hit a record of 8 months on Monday, November 8th, after its corporate owner Tenet Health announced $448 million in profits for its third quarter due to increased emergency room admissions and surgeries and total revenues of more than $4 billion. The Fortune 100 company has reaped profits in excess of $645 million throughout the nurses' strike, a strike waged to encourage Tenet to invest a portion of its vast resources to ensure safer patient care. Nurses started striking in March after what they said was months of advocacy to CEO Carolyn Jackson that patient conditions were unsafe and staffing numbers needed to be increased. The nurses are clear that any negotiated return to work agreement must also include a negotiated resolution of any and all unfair labour practice charges that nurses have filed. On the 31st of December 2020, the Amman Magistrates Criminal Court issued a controversial court decision that has dissolved Jordan Teachers Union, the country's largest independent trade union. This while 4 of the 12 members of the union's leaders were immediately arrested. On the 3rd of January 2021, hundreds of teachers held in a sit-in in front of the parliament in the capital Amman, demanding the annulment of the decision to dissolve the union's executive structure and stop forcing activist teachers into retirement. Since the Jordan Teachers Union establishment, it has entered into a confrontation with the government related to protecting the rights of teachers and in particular improving their salaries in public schools. The Education International, with the support of International Trade Union Confederation, is calling on the Georgian government to stop the dissolution of the Georgian Teachers Association and the mass dismissals of teachers, including 14 GTA leaders. And in a statement, the International Trade Union Confederation and Global Union Federations condemned Israel's designation of 6 Palestinian human rights groups as terrorist organizations. Palestinian, Israeli, and international human rights experts have joined the widespread criticism of the move. Sharon Bureau, ITUC General Secretary, called the step by Israel outrageous. Bureau said that it is no coincidence that this announcement coincides with Israel's decision to build more than 4,000 new houses in illegal Israeli settlements inside Palestine, a move that has been sharply criticized by even Israel's closest allies. The Global Union Federation and their members around the world call for the Israeli government to reverse the designation of the Palestinian human rights groups as terrorists and cancel their decision to add 4,000 more homes to the illegal settlements. Well, that's a wrap from my side. If you have any story you'd like to share with us, you can send a WhatsApp message or a voice note to 081 552 4551 or simply send us an email to labor@wwmp.org.za. Back to Helga to conclude this week's topic of discussion on the Eskom crisis and its impact on the working class.
Thanks, Michaela. Before you go, some good
Helga.
news. We've been told, well, social media has told us that Eskom might just stop the load shedding.
As the good news as it sounds, is it confirmed that it's going to happen?
I'm going to ask our guests. Believe me, I'm going to ask. Maybe they've got an insight that we don't have. Thank you, Michaela Miller. Until next time. So there we have it. We're going to leave that question to the three of you as your final parting shot. Is load shedding going to be lifted? Well, to you at home, welcome back. Let's get back onto the conversation. Can you... I was a little bit distracted there. Can you, before the break, you spoke and you were telling us that we were talking about the just transition and the issue of green capitalism in the context of COP26. I want to bring Pakamile into this part of the conversation because Pakamile, the issue of a just transition, the issue of renewable energies, the myth is, of course, that renewable energies will not improve the conditions of workers, will not give as much jobs as fossil fuels. But we know this is a myth. What is the position on NUMSA in regard to renewable energies being a potential increase of employment in the sector?
I wouldn't be so quick. I mean, our position is informed by the reality on the ground. We were made all kinds of promises in relation to renewable energy and jobs that would be created. And my understanding from what I read is that it can, some of the more recent research spoke about 13,000 jobs, which is problematic because if it's true that 13,000 jobs is what could be created, it would create a crisis for South Africa because Eskom currently employs more than 40,000 employees. And our problem is beyond just Eskom itself. It's the research by the CSIR, which shows that closing down power stations in Mpumalanga will result in at least 100,000 jobs lost along the value chain. Our concern as unions is that we so far have not seen a plan by this government in relation to what happens in Mpumalanga. What's the social plan for Mpumalanga? What is the economic strategy to revive all those sectors and industries along the value chain that will suddenly disappear once renewable takes over? And I think it's a very, very valid concern from Labour because we have a very real experience of this government flat out lying when it comes to promises of job creation. We cannot afford to be misled on this issue. We are sitting at 40% unemployment and rising in terms of the expanded definition, and skyrocketing poverty levels. So when we talk about a just transition, we mean in the truest sense of exactly what is captured in the ILO document about how this process needs to unfold. It very clearly states that whatever decisions are taken in relation to replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy, you need to ensure that the next generation does not suffer as a result of that, number one. Number two, it talks about a process which is led and directed by workers and their families, where they are actually the ones in the driving seat. We've not seen that as Labour. We are hearing a lot of what's going to happen in the media through statements and announcements from government. We are not in the driving seat. We are being told. And even these commitments that have recently been announced, again, where is the social plan to replace these jobs? We care about detail because it matters, because we've been misled so many times on these issues.
Phakamile, let me bring Sandra in to this part of the conversation because, of course, Sandra, the journey through a just transition is not unique to South Africa. And Kanile speaks about the German experience. Give us, our viewers, a sense of what this transition could mean for workers and the stability of their jobs and of their lives if we were to move away from fossil fuels. And as Phakamile says, can we trust that there is a social plan attached to this? And what was the German social plan? It's a lot of questions, I know.
I'll try. Look, I think the research that has been done does show that renewable energy is a job creator. It does create jobs. I think where the problem comes in is that it's not a one-for-one job creator. So you can't say, here's a coal miner or a worker in a electricity generating plant that's fueled by fossil fuel, and now they're going to get a job in renewable energy. It's not going to happen like that, and I think that's the biggest problem. If you think about it, we have high levels of energy poverty in South Africa. Not only that, we also want to increase electrification because a lot of the processes, if you think about dealing with climate change, reducing carbon emissions, etc., a lot of the processes like transport, which are currently not electrified, we want them to become electrified as a way of reducing carbon emissions. So we actually need to increase electricity generation. So in theory, there should be the jobs. And I think the problem comes in, it's not just a simple, well, I leave my coal job and I walk into a renewable job. So I think Phakamile has hit the nail on the head when she says that there's a lack of planning. There's a lack of kind of commitment from the government to say, let's look at this holistically. Let's look at it. And that's the only way that this can be done. That's the only way you can even begin to start talking about a just transition, in my view, is you have to look at this holistically. You have to say, Eskom's doesn't exist in isolation. Eskom is part of a kind of a social context and economic context, and we have to look at how all the parts work together and how all the bits fit together. And we have to have a national plan. We have to have an understanding of the impact on communities, because if we move away from coal, what's going to happen to those communities? It's like dropping a pebble into a pond. The ramifications are just going to grow and grow and grow. And if there's nothing to say, well, this is what we're going to do, we're going to be in an even worse crisis than we are now. So I think that's very important to look at. I think the other, I think the other point to just make about the transition to renewable energy is that I don't think, particularly with South Africa being so dependent on fossil fuels, it can't be a fast transition. It can't be something that happens overnight, because there are a lot of technical questions that need to be addressed. So already, the battery technology is improving. So storage is becoming a less of an issue. But, there's enormous grid issues that are going to have to be addressed. How do you change the grid? Yeah. So sorry, I'm going on, but yeah, those are the issues that need to be taken into account.
Clearly. Don't go away. When we come back, we're going to join our guests for the final segment, and we're going to hear what their organizations are doing in this next period of the Eskom crisis. Welcome back. If you just joined us, we are of course talking the Eskom crisis. Latest is that it's been suspended. Our panel of guests, Sandra van Niekerk, Pakamile Schlaube Majola and Kanyile Baloy, have very different views about whether a possible suspension of load shedding is forever or for just now. Sandra, thank you. Before the break, you of course sketched the scenario of what is waiting for us, that while we might have increased capacity, all of you agree that there has not been enough investment in Eskom over the last almost 3 decades. That, Kanyile, as you said, the writing was on the wall in 2007, a full year before I was stuck in a lift because of the first experience of load shedding. Kanyile, tell us, the National Union of Mine Workers, of course, has a very intimate relationship with Eskom, just like NUMSA. What is the next phase in this struggle, in this crisis? As Sandra says, lack of planning and no forward thinking about what happens to communities that are parts of the value chain, Pakamile also indicates. What is the NUM and its way forward on the crisis?
Yeah, no, the NUM is going to be campaigning a lot, from now on going forward, to conscientize society, on the crisis of Eskom. Because the problem of Eskom is not what we are told. The problems of Eskom are what some of them, Pakamile said, like the price of primary energy. The country, we must make sure that the country addresses the issue of the cost of coal and diesel, and other forms of primary energy. It's too expensive. The issue of IPPs, Eskom is paying a lot of money to IPPs. Actually, they're saying in the life of IPPs, Eskom will end up paying 1.4 trillion rands to the IPPs if we continue the relationship of Eskom and the IPPs as it is, because this relationship of Eskom and the IPPs is milking Eskom. If you go to the Eskom financial statement, you'll see how much money goes to the IPPs every year. Last financial year, Eskom paid 21 billion to the IPPs. That is a lot of money. So we want to campaign on that, and conscientize society. We also are going to campaign for government to make sure that they put proper leadership in Eskom, executive and the board. Because you see, you can't have leaders of the organization who don't believe in the organization itself. Obviously, they will make sure that the organization fails. A person that says the organization is already dead, we need someone who will believe in Eskom, who will say, no, Eskom is not doing well now, but it can be resuscitated and it can start performing. We need such a person, and we have a lot of professionals in South Africa who can, black and white, who can actually take over Eskom and run it.
Let me ask Pakamile. Kanyile talks about a series of campaigns. One is a campaign to conscientize society, a campaign on the trillion rand budget proposed for IPP expansion, lobbying around leadership in Eskom. I'm going to throw a cat amongst the pigeons and ask if these trade union campaigns is something that will see the National Union of Mine Workers and NUMSA come together finally to campaign about a common good, which is of course our energy sector.
Well, NUM and NUMSA have actually been working very well together for some time now on these issues. In 2018, we led a mass march to the union buildings, actually, on the issue of Eskom and all of these changes that we have problems with, and demanding real transparency, especially around the impact of the renewable energy independent power producers. As Kanyile says, I mean, you're talking, if people remember the controversy around Zuma and the nuclear project, which at that time was estimated to cost R1 trillion. And everybody marched, and there were even demands for Zuma to be removed on the basis of that. IPPs are going to cost 1.4 trillion. And yet we don't see the same level of outrage. And for us as NUMSA, the campaign started the moment that Jeff Hadebe made the announcement to extend REIPPs in 2018, and we went to court to try and block him. So we have really been doing everything possible, whether it's going to court, whether it's going to the streets through marches, to try and highlight and sensitize the public to the fact that we are very much being misled on this issue. What we are seeing on the issue of just transition is more of the ANC ensuring that those who are politically connected to the leadership are rewarded. Just recently, for example, the announcement made by Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Minerals and Energy, to extend more contracts to REIPPs. If you recall, who was the beneficiary of most of that? It was Patrice Motsepe. Who is Patrice Motsepe? Well, he happens to be the brother-in-law of the president and the former Minister of Minerals and Energy. So it tells you what exactly has changed since Zuma left. Nothing has changed, because the same things we were complaining about corruption in procurement, about how SOEs are used to enrich those who are members of the political elite within the ANC, about how privatization is happening for the benefit of capitalists. All of that is happening. And the only people who are paying the consequences for all of these changes are ordinary workers and their families. No one at the highest levels of government, whether it's the board of Eskom, even management, has had to take responsibility for the state of Eskom, except for workers and their families.
Sandra, I'd like you to maybe give comment on the issue of that this is a repeat of every high stakes game in our society, whether it's telecom, whether it's minerals, whether it's agriculture and land. There's always a gap that gets taken if we go along the same trajectory that Pakamile sketches. Is renewable energy and the opportunities, the green capitalism that Kanile talks about, is this another potential thing that society has to guard against?
Absolutely. I mean, we need renewable energy. We've got a crisis of climate change. We need renewable energy. What we don't need is privatized renewable energy, because privatized renewable energy is simply the profiteers and the people looking to make fast money, giving them another opportunity to do that. So I think what we have to emphasize is renewable energy as a public good. We need to emphasize energy as a public good. And from that perspective, we then say we need a planned transition, which involves workers, involves communities, in deciding on how to go about that, on how to process that position. And I think for PSI, this whole process feeds into very much a kind of a campaign that PSI has of people over profits, that we don't want energy to be about profit making, we want it to be about people. And so for me, a very key component would be saying, yes, we need to transform Eskom. We need to change it from being a private, a marketized, commodified entity back into a public entity, to take on renewable energy. And if that happens, then I think we can have a transition which can actually deal with a lot of the, I think with COVID, we saw how important health as a public good is. And we saw that when health has been defunded, privatized, we saw how difficult it is to deal with a pandemic like COVID. And I think in the same way, we've got to understand that unless we have electricity as a public good, we can't meet the needs of people. And so I think it is very important that we are going down that road of and I think it's feeding into a global movement to emphasize public basic like electricity, water, health as global public goods. And I think that is kind of there's been a kind of a revived energy given into that campaign.
Thank you, Sandra.
Because of the experience of COVID.
We're going to have to leave it there to you at home. Is electricity a public good? Is renewable energy a public good? And how do we plan for the transition to a renewable energy without sacrificing the stability of workers and their families? Thank you so much to Sandra van Niekerk from Public Service International, Pakamile Schlaube Majolo from NUMSA, Kanile Baloy from the National Union of Mine Workers. Certainly no stranger to the Labour Show. Thank you to all of you for joining us. And to you at home, till next time from me, Helga, and the crew, have a good evening.